right here.
Park Green Team. I'm Cindy Dibella, for those of you who don't already know me, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Green Team. Sajivan Ikle-Khalsa on the other side is one of the other co-chairs. We have Mayor Kate Stewart and a host of other folks, and one of their first agenda items is going to be to introduce each other. I want to I'm going to be facilitating and trying to keep us on time. And I'm going over the purposes of the meeting, which are to discuss updating the joint Green Team priorities that got set last year just before the council and mayor changed, and to identify some specific areas that we might work together on. So the first item is to go around and introduce ourselves to each other, starting with, I guess, Fred, because was looking at me, and then Rizzy, and then Kate.
I'm glad you noticed. I'm Fred Schultz, council member for Ward 6.
Going this way?
Kate Stewart, Mayor.
Peter Kovar, Ward 1, where we are now, council member.
Jesse Carpenter, City Clerk.
Suzanne Ludlow, City Manager.
I'm Cindy, Ward 2.
Shannon Baker-Branstetter, Committee on the Environment member.
Dennis Borum, Ward 6.
Paul Krasowski, Ward 1.
Marty Ittner, Ward 5.
Jamie Gerlaw, Ward 1.
Lauren Marshall, Ward 1.
Riyad Mohammed, Ward 6.
Lindsay Robinette Shaw, Ward 6.
Helen Gilband, Ward 3.
Sajivan Ikle-Khalsa, Ward 2.
Gina Mathias, Sustainability Manager.
Rizzy Qureshi, Ward 3.
Okay, so the first agenda item is updating the Council on Environmental Efforts in the past year. One of the handouts, the one that starts with sustainability projects fiscal 16. It looks like this. For people who are sitting back there, I think there's some extra copies here. Looks like this. It goes on for a couple pages, double-sided. So it's on the back of one of the pages. And Gina put this together with the help of a bunch of other people in the city staff. We don't want to make this a formal... We don't want to make this a formal report, but we will just highlight for you what's been going on this past year. And if you all want a more formal presentation from Public Works, I'm sure that you could have it at some other point. Do you want to do it, or do you want me to do it? Okay. All right. Well, one of the things to point out is that environmental issues are not just covered by Public Works. You all know that, but just to bring that into focus here, on Wednesday you're going to be hearing about a parking study, about bike share, about in LED lighting. I think that's a lot of big projects. There's a new environmental position that's going to be advertised shortly, environmental education and enforcement. The council adopted a resolution to have a statement on all of your decisions that what the environmental impacts might be, just a little flag for everything. So that's another thing that's happened recently. And there's been a lot of support for infrastructure and capital equipment updates, which allows for more efficient technologies to be installed before you have to go back and catch up. So that's all. A lot of that is outside of the purview of the sustainability program. But the focus of the sustainability program has been on implementing the residential part of the Energy Action Plan and the city part of the action plan. There's a long list here of wonderful things that have been going on, but quite seriously, it's been a very productive year in terms of outreach on energy efficiency between the Home Energy Challenge and the other sustainability work that's going on here. There's been a lot of work on stormwater in the city, a lot of investment in trees, sidewalks for a walkable community, and the details on the second page of the rebates for energy efficiency and some of the other environmental education expenditures are outlined here for y'all. And the last page just reinforces the notion that there's a lot of programs that are affected by environmental issues besides the ones that go on in Public Works. Is there any comment or discussion or questions about this before we move to City Council perspectives on sustainability? Or so is there any comment or question about the report from the city on what's been going on? Silence is golden. Okay, so thank you, council members, for coming to our meeting. And we thought it would be appropriate to let you all have a chance to say a few short words about your perspectives, especially since two of you are new to this, and we haven't really had a chance in a group to hear your views. Mayor Kate, do you want to start?
You want me to start? Okay, terrific. Well, first I just want to say thank you to everyone on the committee. I know how hard you all work and how wonderful the ideas are you come up with, and then how responsive you are to residents who come to you with lots of ideas. So I thank you for that. And also for how organized the committee is and the information that you provide us. I think that's also very helpful. I will speak for myself. The environment is not an area I have expertise outside of being on the city council and now being mayor, and so having such a strong committee and strong city staff that prioritizes this, I feel very lucky to have that, so thank you for that as well. In terms of the city council and where we've been going, Cindy identified a number of things that we tried to put in place right away, having something on our agenda. It talks about the environmental impact. We did add the additional staff person this year for education and enforcement, especially on environmental issues. And I think moving forward, when we thought about, and we all met, and my colleagues will speak to this as well, in our retreats to look at what our priorities are moving forward, you will see that the environment and sustainability is mentioned. But I think in our conversations, environment and sustainability issues is something that really runs through all of the priorities we have in the city. And we would like to work with all of you on the committee to figure out how best to highlight that even more as we look at the city priorities moving forward. So I'm glad we're having this meeting, our annual meeting. And just to let you know, the City Council will be reviewing our priorities in, I think, November. We decided, and we're actually going to do our retreats probably a little earlier this year in December. So just to give you a highlight on that, those are always open meetings as well. And so we'll be coming back to you and asking you for even more feedback after tonight. So, thank you. Anyone else on the council would like to?
Sure. Thank you for having us here. I was actually excited to attend this meeting. It's my first meeting. And I was just saying to my colleagues at the last city council meeting, it was this weekend about 3 years ago when my family came here on a trip from New York City, sort of house hunting and hunting for a community to live in DC, or in the DC area. And we fell in love with this community at the street festival with the tree canopy and meeting all kinds of engaged individuals who cared about the environment and issues that were important to my family and I. Prior to coming here, I had an opportunity to look at what this committee is composed of, particularly the individuals, and each of you, many of you, have expertise in this area in your sort of professional life, and I think as a council member who I think, like the mayor, believes strongly in everything we can do from our standpoint to ensure that our focus on the environment and our an impact on how we conduct ourselves in this community as a city government, and also how we can educate our fellow residents on these issues. We're going to look to you for your expertise, and I appreciate this conversation as being sort of a stepping stone towards that. I was just telling a friend of mine about how we have a tree commission and a committee on the environment. He couldn't believe that we had two committees, separate committees that deal with those issues, because he felt there were one issue. But thank you very much for having us here, and I look forward to working with all of you.
I neglected to acknowledge that there's a few members of the tree commission who are here tonight also, and I apologize for just blowing right through that. I'm nervous about making sure everything stays on time. So yeah, speaking of tree commission.
I'll try to respect keeping you on time, but it's against my nature. I'm afraid. At least that's what the former mayor used to always whisper. He'd say, "Hurry up." I was on the city council, well, in 2010 when Council Member Josh Wright proposed the idea that we get into environmental sustainability and make that a very top priority. And that was the beginning of, I guess you could say, the beginning of a many-year process that is still going on and enlarging as it goes. And it's been exciting for me to be part of that. It took us a number of years just to figure out our very first step, and we ended up with our sustainability manager as part of that process, which was a big leap forward, and we found an extraordinarily qualified person to fill that job. And we are doing a lot of things here, as shown on the sustainability projects list, but I think all of us probably sort of see we're happy about that, if my guess is correct, but we also sort of sense that there's so much that we haven't gotten to yet. And I mean, for one, for example, is the tree commission, the status of our canopy trees, which the tree commission is very, very anxious about, and I spoke about it last week's city council meeting. But there are other things as well. I mean, the stormwater process has got to continue if we're going to keep up with the EPA's requirements with regard to the Chesapeake Bay, and just deal with a lot of problems that we have in the city with regard to stormwater runoff. But I guess of the various things that, I mean, when you think about the stuff like the polystyrene ban, the bag ban, and all that, and the hiring of this new person that's in our code enforcement, which is now in the police department, you know, we'll be getting the polystyrene ban enforced, making sure it's being enforced, the bag ban's being enforced. The Safe Grow ordinance is being enforced. Those were things that we just didn't have the means to actually, I mean, we passed these ordinances with great enthusiasm, but at the same time we sort of didn't really think too much about how we were going to make sure these things got enforced. Although a great deal of the progress that we will make is going to probably be because residents, I think it's safe to say most residents are conscientious about things, and they want to do these things. They want to be careful about recycling and that sort of thing. But still, enforcement needs to be there. That's just a fact of life. My largest frustration is with regard to what I think is an inadequacy of attention to our trees in the city of Tacoma Park. And while we refer to ourselves as Tree City, among other things, when I look around me, it's just discouraging. And I'm not gonna take any more time to talk about all of that right now, but that's sort of the thing that I'm really concerned about. Members of the Tree Commission know that, and I talked about it last week. I think there's a lot we can do in just that one area, not to mention some of these other areas, which I'm sure we'll be all talking about here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cindy, and hello to everybody. I got an opportunity to come to the last version of this meeting last fall, and I think at the time it was soon after I had first announced that I was running for the seat that Seth was stepping down from, and so people thought, who's that guy sitting at the table talking about that? But it's been great since I did begin serving, and I saw even then that this was a really well-organized committee, and I've wish some of the others were as organized and as busy. I also don't want to take up a lot of time. I think the advice that I get, and Paul in particular, just because of various reasons, and being a fellow Ward 1er, I've heard from him a lot in a positive way. And the tree folks who spoke, I think that was great at the other meeting. Just a couple of priorities that I'm thinking about. One is we do have to delve into the tree ordinance some more, and I'm glad that Suzanne Ludlow in particular has gotten us in a place where we're going a little bit more slowly on the Pepco tree removals, which we talked about. I mentioned to a few people that I'd like to explore with the state legislators the idea that maybe we could get some pilot funding for burying electrical transmission lines in heavily treed areas. Not only would that reduce longer power outages if we could do it right, but it could protect trees and also maybe create some jobs. On the stormwater piece, I'd like to find a way to, and we've talked about this a bit before, to help homeowners here in Tacoma Park who can't currently take advantage of the tax break that the rest of the county can, to find a way to provide financial incentives for people to address stormwater problems in various ways. I'm very concerned about the environmental impact of a number of the development projects that are in various stages, and I think we're going to be talking about that shortly, it looks like. So I think that's an area that I'd like to give attention to. And then I've mentioned this before, and I don't know what it would involve, and this is for a little bit down the road, but I'd like us to explore what it would mean to set a date in the future by which we could be carbon neutral, whether it's just the municipal government or the whole city. I don't know which it should be, but it'd be great to explore what that would mean. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
I just want to let you know that Councilmember Smith sends his regrets, but he got held up at another meeting and won't be able to join us this evening.
He's okay, right?
Yeah, he just got held up.
I'm a prosecutor when somebody's
Not that
No,
kind
that
of
was
held up. The other kind of held up.
Stuck, delayed, sorry, poor choice of words.
Yeah, and while
Sorry, I did not.
while
My
we're
brain
on the
didn't go.
subject, we have two committee members, Sarah Mazur and Tom Simchak, who are out of town for work and won't be joining us. So I snagged their tags so they wouldn't be embarrassed.
Now you're outing them.
Now I'm out of them. Well,
Now they're on tape for
you were out of town for a while.
They got held up. They couldn't help it.
Okay, well that's great. So the two big items are looking at the Green Team priorities that the committee has gone over and tried to update, and I guess essentially proposing a new set. And I don't know, Sid, even if you want to talk us through that. And then the second piece is, as I said earlier, looking at specific things we might look at to work together. But those are the two big time-consuming pieces here tonight.
So you're going to go through page 2? Is that it? Sydney?
Yeah. That sounds right.
We basically looked at our last year's list, and we reshuffled things a little bit. Moved a couple things up, a couple things down, and added a few. And, in summary, pretty much just like to focus on the first top of the page there. And you can see we've shifted the energy efficiency focus, where last year it was kind of residential and primarily in a bit of multifamily. and now it's more into the commercial municipal area, since we did a pretty good impact with the home energy challenge on the residential. We still like to work on that, and it's still an ongoing program that is supported, and there's still rebates around for it for a while. But the focus is now to look at more institutional size things. Partly in response to Council's own priorities about renewable energy, we've added renewable energy as a specific separate item in the first tier of priorities. Our committee needs to review that a little bit more. We add that in our work session group previous to this meeting. See, tree canopy is still kind of top up in the upper areas. We're looking at waste management as well in coordination with the composting project, litter issues, plastic bag ban. This is something that's kind of almost a de facto priority, but I believe it's under consideration for the next kind of neighborhood environmental challenges to kind of look at home energy waste or potentially water issues. We decided to move up transportation up, as it was a large carbon source, even though a lot of it's kind of pass through commuter traffic. So we're not sure what the implementation of things around that will be. We wanted to move it up from the third tier where it was last year. And these third tier items are either a little bit new, or we're noticing that they're not getting as much. Either like stormwater is actually a regulated, mandated kind of state program that's running. Daryl's on top of it with her staff, and we feel like it doesn't need our further pushing on it. Though I do welcome the idea of getting the city to finally get some rebates that match the counties, and that seems like maybe we could do that without too much headache. And then open space, we had it as a higher priority last year. It's moved along. I know Erkin in Housing and Community Development has been trying to finish his report and whatnot, but he keeps getting kind of sidetracked, and it's fallen. We don't know that that's going to be a higher priority until it moves up and it keeps getting bumped. So this is where we stand. There's more notes about it and summary items later that can be reviewed if we want, but that's where we came up with, and we're looking here to see how that matches with council's priorities or agreements, and if that can kind of have a joint kind of moving forward direction for us all to go for the next 12 months. I did have a follow-up question for the mayor on the last point, is that you talked about the retreat coming up. Is this meeting and this priority document going to be sufficient to feed what you guys need for your retreat, or would you like any more follow-up from the committee to explore anything here or help guide anything that you feel is going to come up in the retreat?
Mm-hmm. I think probably after this meeting we will probably request more information. Okay. I was reflecting with the city manager and the deputy city manager how we did the retreat last year, and this year one of the reasons I'd like to split it and start in December and then January is to allow us to get more background information. As I like to admit what I don't know as well as what I do know, and so I look to all of you as the experts to help guide us, particularly on environmental issues with our city staff. And so I feel like instead of the council sitting around the table being like, oh, that sounds like a good idea, let's put a sticker next to that one, we probably will request more specific information from you all. Does that answer the question?
Yes. And I guess since I went through the summary of this page, if there are questions or about this page or the following 2, 3, 4, people want to take a minute to scan those and ask any questions they have.
So the next page is just a summary of what the council came up with in February of 2016.
Right.
The next page is an update of the Sustainable Maryland actions table. Those of you who have been around a while remember that the reason we have a green team is because of the Sustainable Maryland program, and not everything that is innovative, especially the more innovative things, don't all fit into the Sustainable Maryland program boxes, but the things that do are in this table and their status. So, and then and the checks are things that are done.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
Sustainable Maryland, the program was invented, I guess, what, about 4 or 5 years ago. They set these standards, and we became officially certified, I guess, at least a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I'm not sure exactly when. But I've had conversations with the gentleman, what's his name, who is the chairman of that, or staffs that program. It's one of those names that, interesting name, I can never remember it though. About the possibility of their resetting or creating new levels, because frankly, we're out in the far reaches of the space out there, and we're beyond criteria, and until and unless Sustainable Maryland comes up with some new metrics, we're just doing stuff that doesn't seem to score any points for anything.
Or it scores points in the innovative
Right.
alternatives box.
So do you
But
have
yeah,
any
so Sarah, who's
information
our
on that?
yes, we do. Sarah, who's our Sustainable Maryland Committee, for lack of a better our liaison, I guess you'd call it. She checked with them a couple weeks ago, and I think Gina knows this also. They don't have any current plan for creating tiers to give the cities, the communities that have done a lot beyond the minimum extra credit, but they are still active. They still do workshops and trainings for staff and committee members. They still are signing up communities and certifying communities, but they're not looking at that extra tier. So we, I think as a committee, have just said, well, we're going to keep track of it, but it's not a big focus, because
Right.
we're more than certified.
I would agree. Once you become certified and checked off a lot of these things, then we're pretty much on our own.
Yeah.
Although we can still publicize these things, of course, and saying like the Flower Avenue project is that's earth-shattering for a small city of this size.
Yes.
To do something on Green Street like that. That would have been great on one of these categories for Sustainable Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're still completing it, we're going ahead with it, it's going to be great when it's totally done. And we should go out to the world with that and say, look, this is what we did. We could maybe figure out some ways to post that on social media or some of our professional associations, get it out there.
Sounds like it's coming.
Yeah, we want to blast that everywhere.
Yeah.
I've even said that it should be made into a case study, not just for Maryland, but for small towns across America, because it's quite an accomplishment. I mean, even though we haven't even started building the darn thing, what we've done so far is
just get into agreement. Yeah.
Right. So one thing to have on the city's radar for that, in my day job, I work for the U.S. Forest Service. I'm one of the national program managers for urban and community forestry. And in partnership with NOAA, we just built out the built environment section of the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. And in that, it brings together case studies and data and tools that help other communities sort of dream on how they could increase their resilience to climate change. And so if you were to write up a case study that frames it in terms of helping the city adapt to climate change and increase resilience, and with stormwater, that's certainly a big pull, we could definitely get that put into the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit and available to other communities.
Wonderful.
And the person that needs to know that just walked in the door.
You want to say that again with feeling? We'll let you know.
Take care of it by the next meeting.
If there's, wherever the copies went, maybe somebody could share with Daryl. Thanks. So two other things about the materials. One is, one of the things that's not completed is the climate action plan commitment, which is also a commitment for the Compact of Mayors. So we probably want to double back to that when we go through the individual priorities and talk about that, or in some form, and I think Gina may have some thoughts about it. But as far as the last thing you've got here, environmental aspects of council priorities, we went through and looked at your February 2016 priorities and what it might look like if you built environmental pieces into them. And that might be the kind of thing that you ask for the coming retreat. Just to highlight, I don't know that if you want to go through this, we can, but this is sort of old news in a way that it goes back to priorities you set some months ago and you're about to do it again. But it just gives you an idea of if you really want to take seriously building in environmental aspects into your actions, what some of that might look like. And some of it's pretty ambitious. So
What do you all foresee with, I see that the top priority is energy efficiency, and there's multifamily, commercial, and municipal. And I looked at this page that you're referring to right now, Cindy, but from the standpoint of a city council, have you all thought about ideas in which that issue of energy efficiency, particularly in the commercial field, can manifest itself in what we do on a daily basis, and how we do that? How do we encourage that? How do we enforce that? How do we force that? I don't know what the word is, but if anybody has any ideas, I think that would be really helpful, because there are a lot of old businesses in our town that I think are very like-minded when it comes to energy efficiency, but not to name businesses, but walking around, I think because they're old businesses and they're set in their old ways, I don't think they necessarily understand the impact of how much energy they're using and how they potentially could do things differently. So just some thoughts on that issue would be very helpful.
I can contribute a little bit here. Last year we did a program with college students. It was called the Kilowatt Smackdown. And we gave free energy assessments to 63 Tacoma businesses, Tacoma Park businesses, that gave them a blueprint for how to be more energy efficient and how to save money in their business. And going forward, I think we need to do more of those types of programs, to repeat them so businesses get the message over and over again, and also tap into existing resources. There is a program at the county level called the Green Business Certification, and they will walk a business through opportunities to be more sustainable in areas including saving energy, but also in saving water and their landscaping and their waste management. And so that's an existing resource, and we can help businesses find it and get to it and stay engaged with it.
That's great.
So what the council can do specifically is support that through talking about it, advocating it in your neighborhood, providing the budget resources to do it, making it a priority in that way.
We could even incentivize participation in the program at some point if we wanted to really help businesses move along the path.
Can I ask one question on that? In many cases for businesses, there's a big expense associated with new equipment or whatever it might be. And I know in some cases in the federal government, because I had this experience where I worked, we were able to make improvements to the HVAC, and then that was paid for by the long-term savings. So it didn't require an outlay. Now, is there a way in the private sector to do that? Because in theory, if you put in a more efficient, say, heating and cooling system, there is savings over time associated with that, right? But I don't know if we're at a point where
Absolutely. So there are lots of performance contracting companies whose entire business is that. And so the performance contractors work with municipal governments like Tacoma Park, but they also work with businesses. That's their bread and butter, I think. And that's one option. Pepco offers a suite of incentives and rebates for the commercial sector, from small businesses to large industrial. So there are on their rebates and incentives to make projects more affordable too. So it's just helping the businesses find these resources.
And during that project with the college students, were you finding split incentive problems where the landlord and the tenant, I mean, the tenant was like, yes, I would like a lower energy bill, but they didn't own the building or couldn't make the updates?
A little bit of that. I think more or less with business owners, they're just busy and it's not a priority. I haven't been back to Roscoe's, but like I know they had the free assessment. I know they have old fancy looking Edison incandescent light bulbs in there that are giant energy hogs, and so I found them the LED version of it, which are really attractive, but I don't think they've made the change. Short of just going in and doing it for them. It's just hard to get people's attention.
The Boy Scouts do that.
The Boy Scouts, yeah.
Which, of the 63, were any of those property owners, landlords that you worked with?
I don't recall.
You don't recall, okay. Because it seems to me is that, as has been alluded to here just now, is that some of the small business people, like up on New Hampshire Avenue and those really ancient shopping centers, they probably would say, well, yeah, but I don't control so much of the environment here. The landlord does, and if you go to the landlord and persuade them, then what's going to happen is that those costs are going to be added to the common area maintenance charges, and all of a sudden the individual property owners will see a bump up in their CAM charges that they're thinking, well, what did, you know, why is this? I can't afford to pay this. So somehow or another, when you talked about figuring out ways to do incentives, some financial help, I think that would be something that the council could consider. I mean, it's the sort of thing that is I'm not saying we would advocate it or support it, but it's the sort of thing that we can actually do, or, you know, at least make a decision about.
And I want to piggyback on what Councilmember Schultz just said, especially around affordable housing and the fact that the council has a $400,000 affordable housing reserve that we put in the budget last year. We're still looking at ways to spend that money and to look at it. And I think looking at your goal, what you put forward here, of multifamily homes, and thinking about this affordable housing reserve, if there are ways we could work together and see, you know, maybe there's some of that money that could go towards energy efficiency and helping some of these multifamily homes. We will, on the council, be discussing our affordable housing policy in more depth this fall. One of the things is we recognize, and I think I do speak for my colleagues when we say that, you know, we are proud that we have rent stabilization here in Tacoma Park. We also understand that we have very old buildings in Tacoma Park, and so we also want to think about, are there ways that we can, you know, assist those landlords without increasing the cost of rents for people who live there, and looking at energy efficiency and other things might be a way to help do that.
If I could just make two comments. One is on the priorities that are listed here. The council priorities were for a 2-year period, so much of this builds into, you know, what they will be discussing. But one of the areas where I think we have some real advantages going forward is on economic development and affordable housing when it comes to redeveloping areas along New Hampshire Avenue and other areas that are very inefficient. And just current standards are so much more environmentally correct, energy efficient than you know, than anything that we have. So those are wonderful places that simply living up to our standards with the new development and redevelopment of existing paved areas can move the city forward a long ways, both meeting economic development goals and affordable housing goals, but also environmental goals in areas that we otherwise can't make much difference in.
Anybody else on energy efficiency, since that seems to be where we're at? Or should we move to, because it segues into renewables, I think the council role in renewables may be a little more active. So we were thinking that that by renewable, the council is really talking mostly about solar, but I guess that's a question. Because renewables is a pretty big box, involves an awful lot of things that have trade-offs of their own. Not that solar doesn't, but I guess that would be a question for the council, is do you see a focus primarily on solar, or were you thinking truly more broadly, wood, heat, wind, what else is in the renewables, geothermal?
Biomass is in for nuclear.
Well, I think we know the answer on nuclear.
Some hydroelectrics are in,
Yeah, so I guess,
Not in a city.
in terms of giving.
Where we buy our energy from.
Yeah, in terms of.
For example, one thing the city might consider is, especially with respect to affordable housing, subsidizing 100% wind purchase from a vendor who's selling it already. The city might not have as much exposure that way as they would by installing photovoltaic cells on somebody's roof, but it's another alternative. The city could also be pressuring Pepco. I know this, you're probably tired of hearing Pepco, but pushing Pepco to get more options for renewable sources that are available to people. Right now, the options are somewhat limited. Solar farms are another thing. The city could maybe invest a little in development of solar farms, and again, subsidize participation in solar farms for low-income people as part of affordable housing. So there are a lot of things that we've kind of tossed around.
And I think I can speak for my colleagues to say that honestly, those are the ideas we're looking for you to help us look through for, thinking about the affordable housing, but then also as we look at the priorities and set the budget for next year. So that, to answer the question earlier, what information, all of those options, recommendations from the committee, pros and cons, what would have the biggest impact, would be very helpful for us to discuss.
I would just say, hey, man.
Okay.
Really, I mean, because you guys on this committee, everybody in this room, knows more about what we're talking about here than I do, and we really would need, on this energy efficiency thing, renewable energy. I mean, it's something that intuitively kind of we get it, but in terms of how you actually approach it, that's where we could really use your help.
So before we go run and fill out those options, we get a sense of, does that cover paying premium for renewables, doing free outreach that just helps get word out on things, and using up portions, allocating staff time that's already working on different SPGs. So I want to know how much does council want us to push on that, or just want to see a menu and then yeah, that one's good, that one's cheap, that one's
Not a menu, but some sort of pros and cons on each one, so we can get an idea. Because if sooner or later everything gets reduced to dollars. That's what the budget's all about.
Well, and I think also we realize that sometimes something sounds like a great idea, but you run into barriers. I think we have talked about solar on some of the homes that are owned by some lower income residents, but we know that there sometimes are greater challenges with those homes needing so many more repairs before we even start thinking about solar. So, I think having some guidance, and it also is, we would meet every Wednesday night. We have emails, so if you guys are working on something and want to just check back in with us, that's also just let us know instead of feeling like you have to do an exhaustive list.
There's different scales too. For some places like a pellet stove or a corn stove, to provide auxiliary heat, could be a renewable source that's actually pretty cost effective and on a small scale. And then you can scale that all the way up to making a home totally solar electric, for example, which might be the other end of the spectrum. But you have all these things in between too that you might want to have options to draw from. In this case, we have a very cost-effective option. In this case, we're going to do something bigger because it's needed in this circumstance, or we got a grant for it, something like that.
I mean, I think just drawing on the success of the Georgetown Energy Prize and the the neighborhood energy challenge, I think, Paul, you're right, giving people different options, also where they plug in, was, I think, very helpful in doing that.
Lindsay is an expert on this, but community solar is definitely a big thing in the next 2 years in Maryland and happening really throughout the country. And there are utilities and PPAs that offer a good value to residential consumers and ones that do charge a premium. And so certainly if there is like a well-run pilot that Tacoma Park residents could buy into, you know, helping subsidize that or get out the word, you know, could be really helpful. And then also just shaping the program, I think, to make sure it really is a good value. Because I think that making sure that solar is cost effective, even if it isn't, you know, on a home or, you know, on a low-income apartment, you know, getting access to that is more important than, you know, having it on that roof. So
it would be helpful to have an idea of how to roll it out also from the council level, because this weekend I was just thinking of the street festival yesterday. There was a couple stalls that were talking about community solar, and those poor guys were just getting passed over because everybody was going to the next stall, which was selling something, or my son was pulling me along, and they want to have a conversation, and how we can educate the population about these types of options without it being something you just pass by on the street and somebody wants to have a long conversation with you about, to really articulate in talking points how it's going to be helpful to you and your bottom dollar, but also for the environment.
I mean, right now it's hard to have that conversation because there are no community solar projects to buy into. And that's one way council could get involved. Is there is an organization in Maryland, Neighborhood Sun, that's working with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network to try to get a community solar pilot project in Tacoma Park on one of our large businesses, particularly along New Hampshire Avenue. They also thought the Duville Apartments might have a suitable roof. But so far they have not, I believe, had any interest from the business owners. And so if you have a relationship with any of those business owners, it may help to say, this could add a new revenue stream for your business without you having to really do anything. And it would help Tacoma Park a great deal.
When you say large, define large. Sorry.
Some of, I think, I'm trying to remember the name of the businesses that they identified. I can send you a list.
Yeah, okay, so we send like Aldi, is that large?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Aldi is large.
Okay.
I met with them at one point, they were trying to get in touch, and I think Fred helped make the connection with the owners of the big, the shopping centers over there, and maybe we're gonna try to help, I was gonna try to help them with the college too, but they need big places.
Yeah. And I have that list that they already did a roof survey on, and I would be happy to email that out and see what magic we can work to get some interest.
Okay, I wanna move this along. So the committee is proposing that energy efficiency, renewable energy be in essence the number one priority for environmental activities this coming year. So just park that thought, because you're going to agree with it because it sounds great, but then we haven't been to the others yet. And so the whole point here is to see whether something else needs to rise up here. Fred.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because there are these other things on this list.
Yeah.
And one of the things that looking at this list is that realize if we talk about urban tree canopy, which is the next one in the list, and when we also talk about stormwater, and we're also talking about open space, which are in the third tier right now, sometimes we're going to have projects which involve all of those things simultaneously, and we can sort of think of in terms of just going after stormwater, let's say, or just going after open space, is that at the same time we can go maybe after 3 of these things and knock them out. I mean, because of where I live and my ward, I'm very conscious of the situation along New Hampshire Avenue where the Parks Division controls a lot of the real estate that's green. But it is also an area where stormwater management is dreadful. Waste collection is, because of the topography, is a big problem. And we've got invasives that are just swamping the trees along New Hampshire Avenue and the 7,000 to 7,200 blocks on both sides. Vines growing over everything. And so what happens is that technically these are open spaces and there's a lot of green and some carbon sequestration going on. But it's menacing if you're a human being thinking about enjoying any of that greenery. Well, literally it's not menacing so much as it's impenetrable. So we've got a combination of problems there where the Parks Division, it for whatever reason can't or isn't carrying out its obligation to deal with invasives. We're losing big
Maryland
trees.
National Capital Planning
not the
Parks,
city.
not the
Maryland
city parks.
National Capital Park and
Sure.
Planning Division. This one I refer to the Parks Division because the whole title is a mouthful. And that shows up as green on a topographic map, you know, but it's not really accessible. It's not really open space in the way we as residents would think of open space. It may be a happy place for little animals and like that, but that's about it. You know, Burr Rabbit can be happy in that forest and some of those things, but you know, and so rather than seeing some of these as distinct categories separate from one another, it's like urban tree or stormwater or this or that. Some of this stuff is just, you can't help but address more than one when you get into some of these issue areas. But this is land that we don't control. I mean, we can sit up there and talk about environmental issues at the city council in these kinds of places, but I mean, we can do something about Dorothy's Woods now that we bought it, right? But there's a lot of places in the city that I don't know. I mean, this is a challenge. How do we work with these areas? And these trees are just as important as any other trees.
Taking on the Maryland Planning Commission is certainly a challenge, but Sajeevan.
You know, in response to this, I think, you know, the Flower Avenue Green Streets project kind of does a lot of those things. And that's looking at a piece of property the city owns or manages, and while they're doing improvements, they're looking at many of these things. So that kind of brings up to me is what's the capacity for the city to do more, what I'll call green redevelopment. So it's not new buildings and, you know, tearing stuff down, but like in Ward 6 in the shopping centers, what funding or business association joint efforts can be done to, you know, make it nice and accessible and people want to go there and pretty, but also, you know, do the energy efficiency and water management and tree improvements at the same time. So I don't know. That sounds like an opportunity to make, you know, what I see as a dirtier, more run down part of the city to be more attractive while also making environmental improvements. So I know the Flower Avenue project's big and it's just about to start, but you know, what funding or what can city do on that one? I don't know.
Well, when you talk about New Hampshire Avenue and those big shopping centers, then you're also trespassing into the realm of economic development.
Well, I was just going to say that.
Which is number 3, the last priority in the city's stuff, right?
Yeah, we as a committee, we've kind of haven't really focused on green redevelopment or economic development or any of that for a whole bunch of reasons. But that would be something, and it's not even really on the list we've given you, but that's something that you see coming up and is a priority, well then that's something you'd want to let us know, so.
Can I just say in terms of priorities, you know, most of these look like they're well worth doing, and I get a little nervous about saying these are top priority and these would be second or third. I think the top ones seem to be have the potential to have a broader impact, but in many cases, and I've experienced these kinds of planning efforts in past jobs, you set this one as a priority, but for whatever reason it can't go forward, and these others it can do. And so I imagine all the priorities sort of, you know, coming down like this, kind of like in Space Invaders or whatever, and whichever ones have the ability to move forward should. And I just want to make sure we don't sort of negotiate against ourselves and say, well, that's priority 3, so we won't work on it. And it depends on the bandwidth of the committee and the council and the staff, obviously, but to me, it would be more, you know, category 1 groups, first tier priorities, have the ability to really have a big impact, and some of the other ones maybe less so, but I personally wouldn't not push on any of the later ones. So maybe this is just more of a philosophical observation, but I think we're not going to not seek action on the lower ones, to me.
Yeah.
And I don't speak for my colleagues on this, but I just put that out there.
Yeah, lower priority doesn't mean it isn't important, it just means that the committee only has so much bandwidth.
Right.
I think that's pretty much, is that basically the story, guys?
Yeah, no, we go back and forth, because I think before we didn't have priorities, and then it was too many things.
Yeah.
So,
I get
you know,
that.
and
Right.
I think we do take into consideration, you know, what is possible for the next year, you know, so that's why we reshuffle them as
Right,
opportunities arise.
so for example,
Yeah.
open space, as much as we all think it's important to do the plan, things keep coming up that
It
seem.
should be coming forward though.
Yeah,
But
so
in
that, so
ours,
we.
on the next page, 1 through 5, those are not in priority order, those are just
Right.
happen to be.
Right,
they
that's
could
the way
really
that
be
you,
bullet
yes,
points.
yeah, you did a different exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun if we get to the point where we're all doing the same exercise. So Jeevan.
Another use of this tool in the priorities is budget setting time. And that's when the priorities, that's when the order of them matters a little more, and you're like, well, you know,
Yeah, that's a good point.
we have to do the stormwater one for the requirements, and but some of the other ones that have some more discretion, you'd be like, well, we're probably going to allocate more to the renewable energy project because the council agreed to it, the committee agreed to it, we got a little bit of a game plan laid out, so hopefully your retreat and our research can like make that into the budget for the next year. And then maybe there's some diminishing amounts of budget as you go down the list.
Yeah, and I think having the priorities set out like this is really helpful for that reason. And then also to understand the flexibility, so if opportunities arise, that we do it. If there's all of a sudden, you know, Neighborhood Sun gets really interested, or there's a community solar project, we can put efforts there. But I think if we don't put them on the table at least and identify them, then, you know, we're not also then looking for those opportunities.
I do think it's important to acknowledge, Councilmember Schultz is exactly right, that doing a comprehensive urban tree, urban forest management plan would have impact on stormwater and on open space. If we were to bring Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission and other landowners, utility landowners and others to the table together and come up with a land management plan that we all buy into, that is most definitely going to have stormwater impacts. It is most definitely going to increase the access to open space. And so I think it sort of gets back to a question that Sachivan asked earlier, which is what are the resources that would be available to get something like that done? Because even if the Committee on the Environment, in conjunction with the Tree Commission, were to serve as conveners for the landowners and the folks with the responsibility for that management, we're not going to have the capacity to do somebody's full-time job. And in cities that are really excelling in urban forest management, there's somebody who is in charge of that more regulatory side, which I think is Todd's job in a lot of ways now, an enforcement side, and there's somebody who's sort of in that visionary side that deals with that larger management planning. And so I think it's important to recognize that these are of course interrelated, and it's awkward for us to even parse them out. But it's a question back to you all: is where would those resources lie in your prioritization?
I want to pick up on another aspect of that Bill was alluding to. You know, I think at Tacoma Park here, a lot of what we're talking about is really our relationships with other entities, not just park and planning. We've been talking recently about PEPCO. We've been talking recently about WSSC, about the State Highway Administration, Montgomery College, MCPS. Our relationships with these other entities all figure into a lot of these priorities. You know, if we want to increase use of renewable energy in Tacoma Park, why don't we put it on the school next door, right? That's get them on board. But I think that what the council can do with city staff is to be able to negotiate agreements with these different entities that will help to bring about some of our objectives here. So that park and planning wouldn't be able to say, well, we're going to ignore this strip along New Hampshire Avenue. We just don't like it there. We have a nicer park in Potomac we're going to work on. You know, but we would have a formal relationship with them. The things that you were talking about, access to open space, trees, stormwater management, et cetera, would be in that agreement. So we would bring these other entities along with us there. And I think most of them are probably willing to sit down at the table and talk. I don't know. After that, I don't know where we go. You know?
So, time check, I'm assuming that, well, let me ask, are people we started late, are people comfortable with going until 9?
Yes.
Okay, all right, because we're not even halfway through the list here. So, so the next set of goals, what they are and what they aren't. So under second tier priorities, we had urban tree canopy, by which we meant setting tree canopy goals and developing and identifying ways to implement them. And waste management, by which we meant moving towards zero waste, and transportation, by which we meant trying to reduce carbon emissions. So one of the overarching topics we haven't talked about is whether the city, whether you are interested in advice on carbon neutral and what that means, and that's clearly a bigger discussion than we have time for today. But one of the other discussions that's not built in here is whether is how rapidly you want to move to setting a tree canopy goal, and whether there are other council-related actions that you want to consider.
I'll start. So I would say that regarding the tree canopy goals, as we have been talking about, I think that for me would be one of the top priorities. I would even want to maybe see the urban tree canopy in our top priority with energy efficiency and renewable energy, if that was feasible. Not only in light of what has been going on most recently with PEPCO, but we all know the odyssey with WSSC and even predating those issues. So, and yeah, so I think putting into place, you know, and Cindy, you and I have talked about this, thinking about what our tree canopy goals are, and then looking at our tree ordinance, and that we can do as the council will do the tree ordinance.
You know, I think to me there's also some real integration between the open space and the tree canopy planning. I mean, to me I see some overlap in there as well. I guess one thing that would be very useful is to learn more about how you implement or recommend implementation of a tree canopy goal. And I think that as you've listed here, you know, how do you assess that is really important. And
Suzanne, we're pretty far along in this actually. We've been working with the Tree Commission and with some third parties, and We are, within the next month or so, going to have a draft white paper that we can circulate to you and to the council, which will probably lay out all of these things. So we're getting pretty close. Wouldn't you say, Cindy, we're kind of on the precipice of,
Well, I think so, but I'm also looking at Colleen because I want to make sure Colleen
well,
thinks so.
I think we have pretty good concurrence with the tree
Yeah,
commission
and it
on where we
might
are
have to
now.
have
Yeah.
options, you know, because there's consensus and then there's strong
Yeah.
views to present some alternatives, but as a way to step forward.
Yeah, because there are
Are
some
we
other
ready?
issues too
Okay.
that, you know, for example, some of our wards are underserved with trees compared to other wards. And in my field, in the environmental health business, we view equal access to trees and green space as an important environmental justice issue. So, you know, we're going to be laying out more than just a numerical tree goal, but also how it impacts the social environment and how it can be implemented.
Okay.
The council would like to hear, you know, a bit of a bolder proposal to have a new visionary position in the tree management sector, like as Lauren proposed. You've got the enforcement and the regulatory side, and you've got the, you know, the planning, building, you know, doing all those stuff. That sounds like a pretty clear action item, especially if we're going to move up or join Urban Tree Canopy with all the goals that can also be achieved with it. Sound good? We can bring that.
You're thinking taxes as well, right? I mean, I think
Sure.
one of the things that's really important here is that on a number of these things, I've heard financial incentives or new positions and that kind of thing. And I would love all of those things. But as we go into budget season, it's the balancing of that versus the other kind of needs and capacity of the community. You know, that's the fund council goal.
Yeah.
And responsibility.
And
So
maybe it's a half position or a contract position for a year, and you know, maybe it's put out to. I mean, I think residents. I think residents could.
thinking a body and a table. Never mind.
No, I'm talking about a new staff position, either half or full or something that
Yeah, I just.
that says, you know, we've got Gina here working on the energy efficiency, renewable energy stuff, and we've got a public works staff that does some of it. But you know, we're talking about if we're adding to this and making Urban Tree Canopy a #1 priority or a tier 1 priority, it probably needs more staff, along with looking at the policy issues, environmental justice issue.
I think one thing we could do as a committee is look at how other cities are doing this that are visionaries and are leaders in urban canopy. What are their position descriptions? Are they full-time? Is it contracted out? Who is providing that staff support, and how are they getting it done? Are there taxes levied to pass it? You know, in Flagstaff, for example, I know there was a bond passed to fund restoration activities on neighboring forests because the community members were so committed. And so even though it's a slightly different question than do you want to fund a visionary urban tree canopy, for us that's really what it is. We're not adjacent to huge public lands. And so looking at some of those examples and bringing them to the council as options is something we could certainly
I just want to say that I would, to me, there are other issues more important than urban tree canopy because we have made so much progress and we're already recognized as having enormous value to our property values and to quality of life from trees. And so, to give an example, I would put water quality and restoration of local streams as a much higher priority than urban tree canopy. We have, I think, only one stream in Tacoma Park that hasn't been put into a pipe, and that's Sligo Creek, which itself is unsafe to touch. The water quality in Sligo Creek is rated as unsafe for contact by EPA. All the other streams, for most or all of their length, like the one that goes under this building, are in pipes. And most of those streams are not just in pipes, but they're also running polluted in pipes. And so we don't see them, right? We don't realize that down the back of, you know, at least 2 Ward 1 neighborhoods through Ward 2, in parts of Ward 6 and Ward 5, there are streams that go through neighborhoods that we don't see anymore because they're literally underground. We put them there, previous generations put them there. And I think that issue of water quality, and in Sligo first, but also in these secondary streams, is to me a more important and pressing, you know, example when you think about all the strides that the country's made in water quality and the fact that we don't have a body of water in the city, a natural body of water. Maybe Spring Park. It's safe to touch. Spring Park might be the only one, and I don't know that it's been tested. But other than that, you know, so like we're at like a D or an F on water, on natural water, and we're at like a B or C on trees, or an A, I don't know, it depends on how you rank it. But I think that water quality piece to me is a much more striking issue, and from the fact that we're a playful city, and we focus on recreation, put kids outside near water, and the first thing they want to do is go in it and spend a lot of time in it, and that's something that, in theory, no one in the city should let them do because of the water quality in our streams.
Getting back to momentarily to the tree issue, the urban tree canopy and the relationship to the open space. It's interesting that Councilmember Mail brings this up, because so much of the crap that litters New Hampshire Avenue ends up in Sligo Creek. I mean, the Crossroads Development Authority has an Adopt a Highway program, and 4 times a year gets a group of volunteers possibly to go out there and literally pick it up. And I've done that on a number of occasions, and you just pick up bags and bags and bags of stuff. And I've tried to tell people, the stuff you're picking up off of New Hampshire Avenue is stuff that's going to end up in a very short period of time. All these bottles, literally in that stream, albeit it's at the tail end of it as it goes downstream from Tacoma Park. But it's just an example of how these things are integrated, and that's the waste management thing. But so much of this is like the Sligo Creek starts north of the city. It comes into our city already polluted, and we're going to try and not make it any worse than it already is. What you're saying, and it's a little frustrating. Because we only can get our hands around a piece of our environment. I'm not arguing for or against any of these things. I'm just making a general observation about the complexity of trying.
Just for background, we had trees and natural resources sort of all together, and then because we actually didn't make a lot of progress on that, we thought we'd try splitting it out. So waste management's the next one on the list, and what it says here, again, moving towards zero waste, not with a formalized plan, but with more of an action strategy. Try to come up with one that does that. So rather than well, Gina, do you want to say a word or two about it? Have I got that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So just by way of saying, that's a goal that's especially important to the department, to the city staff. Can I throw you in there? Because of wanting to expand composting and dealing with multifamily recycling, et cetera, all those kinds of problems. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have that in a second category. And the other one that we have in the second category is transportation, which was in the third category last year, and it seems like suddenly there's a lot going on between the bikeways and the parking study, and it seems like there's a lot of focus on that all of a sudden. So we wanted to call some attention to the greenhouse gas and other emissions reductions potentials there. So that's why we have that as second. Any comments or discussion on either of those two? Or should I just keep going?
Comment on transportation.
Yeah.
I would just say that, the electric vehicle charging stations, I think that's really fantastic, both from like a visual, point of view about how Donald Park looks as friendly to EVs, and also just substantively, I see people charging all the time, so it's really fantastic. And I don't know how many people, bought EVs because of it, but I would imagine it's, some percentage. And then, I know that on Wednesday you're talking about the safe roadways and biking infrastructure, and that's all fantastic. And the walk to school day coming up, I think that's also really important for just getting people in new habits and you know, reminding people. So I think those are all good directions.
Part of that equation. When people have a place to walk, the theory is, I guess, is that then they will walk.
Just to jump back on waste for a second, the two actions that I would be interested in as a sort of a 1-2 strategy. And the first one I think the committee could help with is, and we've done this in part, is expanding the size of our recycling bins to be the same size as a normal trash can, a 35 or a 50 gallon, as DC did before the last mayor's ill-fated failed re-election.
For everyone.
In DC, where they shipped, large, right, for everyone. So rolling out, trash cans for everyone that replace the current yellow bins with a large bin, and having the piece for the committee would be just providing for us an overview on 4 places like DC and San Francisco that have done that. What's the immediate shift they see in volume recycled versus thrown away? Because I bet that's the single biggest thing we could do to make a quick change for a relatively small budget. And the second thing is looking at some process to phase in mandatory composting, kitchen waste composting, one way or another, so you had universal household adoption of our current kitchen waste program. So I'll stop there, but those are the 2 steps I think I'd take that I think would have the biggest impact on reducing the waste stream that we have right now.
And litter as well, with the bigger recycling bins, because there's so much litter on Ethan Allen from just small bins.
We do have a person assigned to litter programming in our Department of Housing and Community Development, Lucy.
She's moving into the part of neighborhood services.
Oh, she's moving into the neighborhood?
No, but that effort, the litter control.
It's going to be moved in there. Susie, do you see that as enabling it to evolve better in that location?
I don't think it makes any difference. I think that, I think we have to keep pushing on obviously litter control, but in terms of waste management, if there's something that can be changed by the size of containers, that's one thing. In what it's not my area of expertise, but what I have heard is that food composting is really the biggest area that get the bang for the buck, and the region doesn't have the capacity to deal with that yet. So that's an area that we have to continue pushing on regionally to ensure that we have the capacity, because people want to do it, but when there's no place to take it, it's not gonna do us a lot of good.
Is that something that the council can pursue? Did you mean to say that? Is that a council role?
Well, it's a lobbying thing that we're already doing.
Oh, okay.
But it's really kind of out of our, it's out of our real control.
I've got a question. Have we had a study done in the near recent future about what are the components of our waste stream and where what are the biggest problems with our waste stream?
I can tell you that Ms. Braithwaite has tons of information on that, and we can provide that. We usually do during budget times, but we can share what we've got.
We haven't done any actual waste analysis. We rely on Montgomery County's waste analysis to figure we're fairly similar to what they've got, what they've done.
Daryl, we're recording this, so it would be great if you'd come up to a microphone so we can capture.
So we use Montgomery County's things. We keep count of our composting efforts, and we know what we pick up. If I can just jump to one thing on the transportation goal second tier, I almost think it's not needed as high up, because we're doing lots of transportation. We really have built this in as a major component. So when I'm thinking of, I don't know that unless the committee's had strong ideas about new things that we need to be considering or building into our system. So I guess that's where I'm.
It has changed on last year.
Yeah, sure. We talked about updating
Well, I
the city.
mean, we put in sidewalks and bike lanes and bike share and, you know, we've had a fairly aggressive, movement on that. And we've talked a lot about Flower Avenue, Green Street. I mean, so, you know, we're looking forward to Purple Line, and we work and yell at Right On, and, you know, so there's a variety of things that we do with transportation. But if there's something that you think we're off in terms of our emphasis or something new, that's helpful to know.
I think it probably would be looking at more of the commuter car traffic, something in that realm. It might be some individual, more something on lines of like circulator bus type, local, hyper-local bus things. Potentially, it could involve some more car sharing incentives, either neighborhood kind of vehicle sharing type model stuff. I mean, a lot of it would probably be more innovative and bigger than just implementing things that we are doing pretty well on. I think we're getting, you know, B grades at least on those things. So I don't know if it's trying to boost those up so much, but it's getting the culture around, you know, bike to work day, and, you know, what if we have bike to work every day, once a week kind of things, or, you know, it's potentially stepping things up a few notches more. But I think the bigger, you know, the impact one, we know from the previous carbon impact studies is the cut-through traffic, or the pass-through traffic rather, and whether there's any kind of solutions around that. It really just means
on the street doesn't work. Huh?
It really means making, you know, it less desirable to drive through the city.
Not the utilities had taken care of that.
I kind of thought that one.
Well, not making it, you know, onerous for residents and.
Right. No, it is a hard balance. Yeah.
I think if we could all run on the city council for office on the premises that we were going to stop cut-through traffic in the city, you know, we would be elected emperor for life.
Well, Fred, you closed the bridge in your ward.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
And every other ward is.
But the fact is that I would estimate that 90% of the emissions come through the pass-through commuter traffic on state highways. I mean, you've got at least 30,000 cars a day on 6 lanes of New Hampshire Avenue, and University, you know, is on our border, and then you've got Piney Branch is another state highway, and these are all people that aren't interested in Tacoma Park. They're just trying to get past or through Tacoma Park. And again, it's another example of how we can only control a piece of the action. And when it comes to carbon emissions, I think, didn't we have a greenhouse gas analysis done very early on in our, and we found out that we were already ahead of the curve on greenhouse gas?
Yes, and that's the Brendel group, so that we came in the upper 95th percentile of American cities on greenhouse gases. Of course, that doesn't mean that we can't improve, but they also concluded, like you said, that a lot of the transportation emissions were not from people who live in Tacoma Park. And, you know, except for putting up toll barriers and things like that, it's a difficult problem, because when you do these inventories, it doesn't matter whether you live in Tacoma Park and you're going to the food co-op, for example, or if you live in Prince George's County or Howard County and you're driving through to get to the district. You know, those emissions still come from Tacoma Park.
What if you were to broaden that goal and take out, I think the "and" is sort of the important part. I think it is broader than we're discussing, because I think there are innovative things, like Sajeevan has suggested, that we could be doing around transportation. But if we're talking about carbon emissions, we could also be talking about carbon sequestration. And there might be things that the committee could recommend to the council in terms of ways to encourage carbon sequestration that are within our bounds of control. For example, well, trees, the urban tree canopy is certainly one of them. Another would be wood and building, large wood, large mass timber, or cross-laminated timber, and policies that can encourage the use of that as a way to sequester carbon and decrease emissions through building. So we could broaden that if the sphere of influence is of concern.
Composting is another good way to sequester carbon.
Yeah.
You know.
But I also don't think we should throw our hands up and say it's all cut through traffic. I mean, the fact that there is this parking study, I mean, a lot of residents are driving to where they want to go, and they want to be able to park, you know, on their street in front of their house. So, you know, individual Tacoma Park people are also driving places. So, you know, I think that, you know, there is still more to be done. It's like, you know, it's great to have, you know, bike to work day, but the fact that, and, you know, walk to school day, but the fact that it's a day means that there are a lot of days people aren't doing those. So I think there still are lots of like behavioral and like safe street things that can be done.
So I've been keeping a.
If you could get a stat on the number of cars registered to Tacoma Park residents and try to make that number drop by 10% over 5 years or 20% over 5 years, that to me would be a metric of really significant change. Because the cars themselves, right, are a huge part of the problem, just simply their existence, the demand for new cars and for a supply of cars.
Give a little discount for EVs.
Yeah. If you only have one.
If I could just bring up one thing, we talked about this at the last meeting, that wards 5 and 6 really don't have those nice bike share stations. We have been overlooked for many years. And I know that we share a border with PG County, and there might be some concerns there. I've heard that last year. But, you know, there are people that live in Ward 6, and we do drive because the buses aren't terribly reliable. It's not fun, but, you know,
We have some coming.
we're looking forward to that. So that'll help too.
And we've got another bus stop added in Ward 6 as well.
K9 bus
I saw
stop
that.
got
Yes.
New stop
Very
added
excited
at,
about that.
Yeah.
Urson
So,
Street.
yeah.
A miracle of miracles.
Yeah.
I mean, who'd have,
So I've been keeping a list of things that sound like potential actions, and I want to do two things before we close. One is to get a sense of reordering some of these priorities or not, and the other get a list of whether some of these things people have mentioned are things we really ought to be following up on. The last two items, integrated stormwater, the main focus that we thought we would bring to that would be looking at the private sector, which is something also they think that may be on the list for public works at some point in the next year or two. Open space, we decided we're going to do a plan, you know, sort of how fast or how much of a hurry are we in for that. And the environmental aspects goal is what we talked about at the beginning, building into other priorities what it would look like if you wanted to build an environmental piece in. So we put that out, and I think we've discussed that. So as far as I've heard a couple people say they'd like to see trees move up to 1. I've heard a couple people say they'd like to see transport either reworked or moved down or clarified or focused or something. Comments on the priorities and their order, that comments you haven't made already? Anybody?
I also heard Tree County move down, and a water issue, water quality get added or move up.
Well, first, like Fred so astutely said, we can't deal with water quality unless we deal with tree canopy. They're inextricably intertwined in Tacoma Park. So.
But under that proposal, as Tim kind of said, maybe the focus is water quality, and you're going to get some tree benefits while you're doing it.
I mean, I'd say unless third tier means they're going away, they're not going to exist. I'd rather see water at least appear as a third tier priority. Surely water somewhere, and I don't think that water and trees are inextricably linked, because most of the issues with our water quality come from pollution straight from a leaky pipe or a direct connection to a sewer. I mean, it's fairly direct. Stormwater is a different issue. The runoff, the pollution that comes in stormwater, but our most extreme problem comes from, E. coli and incredible levels of phosphorus from laundry, and I mean, you name it. It's direct old school 1960s, coming out of a broken pipe pollution that we have in our streams.
It's interesting that according to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which I subscribe to, the after agricultural runoff, the urban runoff is the second largest pollutant of the Chesapeake Bay, and that's basically, we're talking about stormwater. That's what they're talking about is stormwater, and in that regard, I think we are doing as best we can to reach the TMDL requirements imposed by the EPA. But the freshwater pollution is only really a small piece of that. It isn't to say it's not important that the kids be able to think of Sligo Creek as a relatively clean place to play. That's absolutely important. But in terms of trying to, the overall big picture, you know, urban runoff is this massive non-point source problem that Maryland and Virginia and all the other states are trying to address. Maryland's doing a better job of it than most of the other states, far better than Pennsylvania, for example. But it is a big problem, and I think that's something that doesn't fall under waste management or doesn't fall under some of these other categories, but does fall under a stormwater controls. Just an observation. I mean, with regard to the tree canopy, we are losing tree canopy. I mean, at least that's my anecdotal evidence, and I will always defer to Todd, who's got a lot of the hard data on that. But it's basically what I see. We got two situations where we got old canopy in our neighborhoods that is literally running out of life. As I mentioned to my neighbor here, Dennis Borum, in the last dozen years, I've seen a dozen, 80 to 100-foot trees come down within eyesight of my house, and 3 of them died just this year within 50 feet of my house. And on the other end of the same neighborhood, there aren't any trees. It's that northern part up there around Kirkland and Ann Street. And we ought to be planting trees, and we are not. Nobody's planting there. We are planting red buds and dogwoods and pretty things like that, but we're not planting the canopy trees. And the city, of course, can only do so much because they're confined to the rights of way. I don't want to go on and on about it, but I do think we're dealing with a declining situation here, and we got to be planting trees, and we got to be figuring out how we get property owners to do it.
So on that note, so as far as the priorities, I think you all tell me if I got this right. So we can rework this a little, be a little more clear about transportation, add something on water quality that picks up on this problem. But there's not a lot of shifting on the list with the possible exception of trees. Okay, so we're going to go with another round of this and see what people think. Now, as far as follow-up actions, after this meeting, the council can ask for whatever you want, whenever you want it. But I heard a few things.
Cindy, can I just
yes.
Do you want to go through and have people raise their hands and vote, like move them up, move them down, not put them on?
I don't know. Do we want to do that?
I mean, then it's clearer to you. You have a sense of more than the outspoken people's views.
You could do that tonight, or because we're missing 2 council members, we can also set a work session up and do it at a city council meeting if that would how helpful to you.
If you wanted to refine any of the text, it really is very useful if there's a count of the council members.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're missing 2 council members tonight. It wouldn't have to be a long work session since we did a lot of the hard work this evening. You could just, and it doesn't have to be the whole committee. Not coming to a council meeting.
I was speaking of the whole.
Yeah. I don't think the council does survey. We do Survey Monkey a lot, but I don't know if you guys do that.
Everybody.
Yeah, not as a formal decision,
Okay.
right? But just, I don't know.
Oh, you mean everybody, like all of us?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
It's just a suggestion, but
we've got 5 minutes. We could do that in 5 minutes, or we could talk about the action items that I've got starred, which is just a list of things that you might want to follow up. Maybe better use of our time is for me to just make a list and let you guys see it, because we can't do all of the things that got talked about tonight. Do you want to do the thumbs up, thumbs down, or?
Well,
Or
I
do you
think we
wanna-
would just have people vote for like their favorite, right? Just have everybody vote for
Right.
like their number one,
I
because
mean,
we can't do like.
I would just, to me, the things I heard were move urban tree canopy up
Okay,
or not.
or not?
Move transportation down or not. Move water quality onto the list, so onto tier 3.
Onto tier 3?
Well,
Or make it tier 4, whatever.
it's not on tier at all, any tier right now, so I was suggesting moving it
Yeah.
up to tier 3. And that's it, right? There's only three
Okay, all
three
right,
recommendations.
yeah, let's give it a go. All right, so, because I haven't heard anybody talking about moving any of the others. Okay, so just everybody, show of hands, move tree, we're gonna do the tree question first. Move tree canopy up.
I have to clarify that a little bit.
Yes.
Because to me, it's not setting the canopy goal so much as like doing the action. Like
Right, move,
mean,
move the
we can
package of
plan
tree
forever,
canopy
but-
issues up.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
Short-term things that can be done.
Right. Yeah, not just the goal, but the ways to implement. Right, this is just a, yeah, so this is why I didn't want to do this. All right, everybody who thinks tree canopy goals and actions should move up, raise their hands. And then everybody who thinks it should move down, raise, stay where it is? Stay where it is? Okay, that's, all right. The second question had to do with,
Move it up. The prevalence of the hands in the room was move it up.
so on transportation, I heard a couple things. One is make it be more clear about what the carbon emissions focus would be. That's addition to what we're already doing. And the second thing I heard was focus on carbon emissions, and they might be broader than transportation. So let's take.
I heard move it down, and that's where I am.
Okay, all right. So.
Not as a city priority, which we're already doing, but as for attention, as Susie said, on this list.
Okay, so so maybe we don't need to vote on redefining the transportation and it being more clear. It's just an action. So two pieces. One, making it broader to include carbon, to flip it to be carbon emissions. Who thinks we ought
But
to?
that's everything, though. I mean, that's energy. That's renewable energy. I mean, that's carbon emissions is
Okay,
most
so
of this.
is there anyone who thinks that's a good idea, besides Lauren?
That was it.
It was a throw out.
About not just carbon emissions, but carbon sequestration.
Right.
And sort of thinking strategically about whether or not we're talking about our contribution, not only in what we're putting out, but also what we're
and
sequestering.
that's a bigger
But that's something we
conversation.
can.
Carbon neutrality, I think that's probably a bigger.
That's a much bigger
than we
topic,
can bite
yeah.
off right now.
I agree.
Right.
So I would take that off the table for vote.
Okay, so transportation, who would like to leave it where it is, and who would like to move it down? There's your two choices. So leave it where it is. Move it down.
Yeah, it's about equal.
Okay.
What was the outcome?
It's like 2.5.
I feel like I need more information. I don't know.
Yeah, so we're back to more.
I could have
info.
easily voted the other way, honestly.
All right, so clearly one of the action items is taking another look at that. I keep looking at you. Shouldn't be. It's not fair.
You're taking care of it.
Right, and then the third one, thank you. The third one is water quality, adding water quality to the list, separate from stormwater, because it is a different issue. Who would like to add it? And who would like to not? Okay. I was not looking at Fred at that moment. Well, that's an interesting set of straw votes. So in conclusion, we do have people that have kids, so we do try to end. 1 minute, and in the 1 minute that I have left, I'm going to read my stars. So refocusing the transportation is one of the actions. Pros and cons and options on purchased energy. We're not going to be able to do all of these. I'm just saying this is what came out. On renewables, So on renewables, what are the pros and cons? What are the options for purchased energy? What can the council do to promote solar farms, for example, Maryland Sun's program? On urban tree canopy, I have a star just because it seems like people want to, regardless of where it is on the list, they would like to see it happen sooner rather than later. The goal part, the setting a canopy goal part. So we talked about getting that proposed, yeah.
Some kind of staff support position contract. That visionary, the visionary piece, either.
Visionary piece, yeah.
Whatever
So
that
there's a white paper on urban tree canopy goals and some of the things that it needs to include. I have looking at affordable housing and economic development and how that's in the environmental aspects section, and how the committee can help with the council's goals on that. Why am I missing one?
What about
Overview.
in Syria?
Overview on recycling, recycling size buckets. I think that's an easy one to answer, maybe. I think we already know. Any other proposed actions that came out of this? So the next step is for the council for us to do two things. One is the urban tree canopy goal draft, and to rework this a little, schedule a work session to talk about it, and for the council to see if on that laundry list of things are there things that you think you would like to see sooner rather than later.
And just from the earlier discussion, it may be something that the council identifies for their goal-setting discussions, the priority discussions coming up in November and December.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for coming to join us.